Hey guys, RanterInShades here, exercising my first commemorates vlog style, and it's time for another episode of What's Wrong With.
What's wrong with me? You wanna know what's wrong with me? I can ask you the exact same thing. What's wrong with me?
This is a band I go way back with. They're one of my first favorite bands from when I started developing my taste. I had no idea people even shat on this band until I started seeing some comments here and there that I felt qualified them for an episode in this series. They always seemed like a band that everybody likes, at least to a degree, and no one really dislikes or even hates them. You can only imagine how much those sentiments bewildered me. This band is none other than the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like I said, the Chili Peppers were one of my first favorite bands that I got into when I was 11 and beginning to explore music, and they're still a band I view as one of my all-time favorites to this day. Even when I was getting more into metal and punk as the years went on, they've always been a consistent mainstay in the realm of my favorite bands. It all started in 2005 when I was taking drum lessons, back when drums was my main instrument and guitar was more of a hobby instrument, long before the roles ended up reversing. One of the first songs I remember my drum teacher writing out for me was the Chili Peppers song Californication from Californication. It was a smooth song with a very laid-back, groovy beat and some calm guitar and bass parts. And when it came time for my first drum recital with this teacher, I really wanted to play the song, but unfortunately someone else had already called dibs on it, so I instead played another one of the hits from the same album, Scar Tissue. The song wasn't as challenging to drum to as Californication, but it had the much more interesting musical parts of the two, especially that soaring guitar solo. A year later, in 2006, the album that would become my favorite of theirs, the double album Stadium Arcadium, came out, and my drum teacher wrote out more songs. While the 5 singles from the album, Danny California, Tell Me Baby, Snow Hey-O, Desecration Smile, and Hump to Bump with that crazy-ass percussion break, are all good to great songs, the deep cuts on the album are really what made learning the songs from my drum lessons and listening to the album in general such a cool experience. I'm talking songs like the title track, Charlie, Storm in a Teacup, Warlocks, Hey, not to be confused with Snow Hey-O, which has my favorite of John Frusciante's solos, the heaviest balls Ready Made.
Oh, clean it up, Johnny!
And my favorite song of theirs containing all the members' best musical characteristics together, Torture Me. Let's talk about those musical characteristics, shall we? Right off the bat, the Chili Peppers have had some great guitarists in the band. My favorite is of course John Frusciante, who is not only a great lead player as you heard in that clip from Ready Made, but I've always liked his use of chordal lead playing whenever he incorporates lead melodies into his rhythm playing. You can hear this in songs like Under the Bridge, Soul to Squeeze, Knock Me Down, Sexy Mexican Maid, Naked in the Rain, the aforementioned Scar Tissue, Stadium Arcadium, and Snow Hey-O, and quite a number of others. And the other guitarists that have been in the band, Hillel Slovak, who was their original guitarist, may he rest in peace. Dave Navarro, who's also from Jane's Addiction, who played on their 1995 album One Hot Minute, which is my least favorite album of theirs that I've listened to anyway, and their current guitarist, Josh Klinghoffer, all have a similar feel that Frusciante brought to the fold, but I really feel Frusciante's playing was what really helped to define the Chili Peppers sound, and that's sort of why I'm not the hugest fan of the albums he doesn't play on. That said though, there's still albums I'd recommend checking out, though it's highly unfortunate that Frusciante isn't in the band at the moment. That's no disrespect to Josh Klinghoffer though, he did a great job when me and 3 of my friends pooled in to get tickets to see the Chili Peppers live in 2012 to celebrate graduating high school, which of course is where I got this shirt. It's unfortunate the washing machine hasn't been the kindest to it, which is why I don't really wear it anymore, but doesn't it look so vintage here? To this day, even despite one of the worst bands I've ever heard opening on that tour, Sleigh Bells, I look back on this as one of the most fun times I've had at a concert. Getting back to the band, Chad Smith, aka Will Ferrell's secret brother, wait, I've made that joke before, is definitely someone that comes to mind when I think of my favorite drummers of all time. He's very laid back and great at playing in the pocket, he's made some unique patterns, he's tasteful with his fills, overall he's just a solid drummer. The Chili Peppers are already very versatile in their sound, and Chad's been consistently complimentary on all the albums he's played on, including the 2 Chickenfoot albums he played on, as well as my guitar hero Joe Satriani's most recent album, What Happens Next. Some songs containing my favorite of his drum beats include the title track on Blood Sugar Sex Magic, Suck My Kiss, I Like Dirt, the title track on By the Way, We Believe, and the aforementioned Stadium Arcadium, Hump to Bump, and Torture Me. Michael Flea Bowsery, what a crazy goddamn bassist. Right up there with Tim Comerford of Rage Against the Machine and Audioslave, Les Claypool of Primus, and Davey 504 when it comes to crazy, funky bassists. Overrated? Maybe, but he's made some great slap bass lines on songs like the Chili Peppers cover of Higher Ground by Stevie Wonder, which is one of my all-time favorite cover songs, Stone Cold Bush, Me and My Friends, Funky Monks, the aforementioned By the Way, Naked in the Rain, and Knock Me Down, and my favorite of his bass lines, Around the World. Not only that, but another thing I've always really liked about Flea is when he creates upper register bass lines that harmonize with the guitar and the softer songs in the Chili Peppers catalog. Some examples of songs he does this in include the Zephyr song, Other Side, and the aforementioned Hey, Californication, and Scar Tissue. And he voiced fucking Donnie from Wild Thornberrys, just thought I'd point that out. Whenever I found out that was him, I was in such hysterics. You could say. I don't really have much to say about Anthony Kiedis as a vocalist. He's very charismatic and has a very distinct voice, and he ain't half bad when he does rap vocals too. Overall, whether you're looking at the really funky albums from the 80s and early 90s, or the more alternative albums from the 90s and 2000s, Red Hot Chili Peppers are one of the most unique and all-around enjoyable bands out there. There's a reason I thought they'd be a good fit for a Super Bowl halftime show in my old Bruno Mars halftime video, which I still can't believe I ended up calling that. Now it's time to debunk. One thing I remember from back when I added the Chili Peppers to the queue of bands I wanted to talk about in this series was this meme that was basically implying that all their songs sounded like Can't Stop and Give It Away.
But here what you say, what I got, you gotta get and put it in you? How about just, what I'd like is I'd like to hug and kiss you.
Like they have the same beat, similar progressions, similar vocals, and an obligatory reference to California. They very clearly do not, at least not most of the time. Some stuff on the early albums do tend to sound derivative from each other at times, and I will agree that Give It Away and Can't Stop are pretty overrated songs in their discography, but I've listed a bunch of different sounding songs throughout this video that counter that idea, especially on Stadium Arcadium. The same applies to this idea that all the songs are about California. Sure, California's brought up a good bit in a few of their songs, but it's an overgeneralization, don't you think? Another common thing I see get brought up is Anthony Kiedis' voice. This seems to be a common thing in a lot of my What's Wrong With is the vocals. I might not think Anthony Kiedis is the greatest singer out there, but he's distinctive, and he is a charismatic frontman, which is a trait that's present in almost every talented rock vocalist. Even then, I never really like when the vocals or what a person's distaste towards a band boils down to, especially when the music itself is interesting instrumentally, as I've demonstrated throughout this video. It's a lot like how I feel about Fall Out Boy. One of my main reasons as to why I can't really get into their stuff outside of their first album is because I'm not the craziest about Patrick Stump's voice, but I can at least acknowledge that musically their stuff isn't the worst out there. Going along with that, the lyrics also get brought up a lot. If it isn't the whole "it's all about California" thing, it's about some of the more sexual lyrics. Again, I feel that's an overgeneralization because an argument like that tends to come from a place of having only heard a few of their early songs and don't know much of their later material, where I do feel like they've calmed down a little in the raunchy department. One good example I have is the song Venice Queen from By the Way, which is about a friend of the band that passed away. Don't Forget Me from the same album is another sentimental sounding song that isn't sexual. Hell, the song that's probably their most famous is about loneliness and the things Kiedis turned to take him out of those feelings. It might not contain the most PG of lyrics towards the end, but it's hella personal and is one of quite a few songs that don't fit this category of being all about the smexy times. I feel like this also counters this idea that they stopped trying after Californication. Honestly, like I've been saying a good bit throughout this video, I think a lot of their best work comes from Stadium Arcadium. Albums like Californication and By the Way might not be as heavy as the early albums, but with a number of the songs on those albums, I have a hard time viewing it as being much of a stretch from albums like Mother's Milk or Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And even if you felt like they were, I feel like Stadium Arcadium can definitely be seen as a return to form. And I myself might not be the craziest about I'm With You, nor have I really been all that interested in checking out their most recent album, The Getaway, mostly due to my skepticism about Danger Mouse producing the album, but I think it's a tad unfair to just write the band off just because of those albums. Another thing about the lyrics I've seen get brought up is that they apparently make no sense? And the example of this is usually the part in Around the World where Kiedis goes, there's apparently a 10-hour fucking loop of that chorus on YouTube. Yeah, it's stupid, but I find it to be more endearing and goofy than anything. Around the World is one of my favorite Chili Peppers songs, and I see that part in the song as just Anthony being a goof and having fun, not really taking himself too seriously. And it's certainly not a good basis for a generalization of the lyrics. One criticism other people have talked to me about before that's related to the band, and that I actually sort of agree with, is that the radio tends to only play a select few of their songs. It's basically just Under the Bridge, Snow Hey-O, Californication, and I guess Give It Away and Can't Stop. How is that the band's fault? That's more of an issue with the radio than anything, which I've talked about before in my classic rock radio video that I made years ago. And like I've said in my video basing dislike of a band off of one song, although I clearly listed more than one song here, if that's all you know in their repertoire, I really think you're doing yourself a disservice by not listening to anything outside of those songs the radio plays. I've even seen John Frusciante's departure get brought up in these discussions. Yes, it was rather unfortunate when his drug addiction resulted in him leaving after Blood Sugar Sex Magic before coming back for Californication. I'm not really a fan of his solo material, but I'm at least glad he was able to rebound back with the Chili Peppers by the end of the 90s. I agree these weren't healthy of habits that the guy was dabbling in, as much as it might be a part of the rock and roll lifestyle, but I'm someone that tends to be a bit easygoing on the subject of people doing drugs. I'm someone that thinks that as long as you're not hurting anyone and you're not hurting yourself and you're not partaking in any drugs that can really fuck you up, you do you. But don't completely close the door on getting cleaned up and
Get your shit together.
which is exactly what Frusciante did. It does suck that he left again after Stadium Arcadium, but again, Josh Klinghoffer has proven to be a decent replacement, and I find it silly to resent a band to this much of a degree because of it. And finally, the story from last year that got me absolutely livid. Some good friends of mine can attest that I ranted up a shitstorm about this story in PMs on Facebook and on Skype, as well as when I shared the story on my fan page at the time. Basically, a women's advocacy group petitioned Spotify to stop featuring problematic artists around the time they announced they weren't going to feature XXXTentacion and R. Kelly in playlists. Among the names in their list of artists they wanted to see get removed was Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, I've talked about how I feel about deplatforming before in my Don't Like, Don't Watch Can Be Valid video, when I mentioned how ignoring the thing you don't like is a more productive thing to do than complain that the thing exists. Check that video out if you haven't seen it. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because I remember being quite worried around the time of Spotify's announcement about stopping their featuring of X and R. Kelly that would lead to a domino effect of more complaints about bands or artists these people don't like or find to be, I fucking hate this word now, problematic, existing on the service. Thus is why I was pissed when I heard about this story. It's like the PMRC all over again. So why were the Chili Peppers included in that little list? Well, because Anthony Kiedis was guilty of sexual misconduct with some underage fans in the 90s. Now, do I condone people doing that? No! That goes without saying. But as half-baked as this might sound, he at least isn't Ian baby rapist Watkins. And I have no reason to believe this behavior is consistent with Kiedis to this day, especially when factoring in that drugs were a big thing with him as well in those times, which I'm not using as an excuse. I'm just pointing out that drugs were part of the equation and his lack of judgment with the poor decisions he's made. Is putting him up against Ian Watkins a sky-high raising of the bar? Maybe, but at least the bar exists. I've preached a message on this channel for years about enjoying music for what it is and being able to separate the art from the artist. And as juvenile as the Chili Peppers might have sounded on their early albums, and while I don't condone the mistakes Anthony Kiedis has made in his life, they aren't above that philosophy of mine. The music is still enjoyable, the songs are still well made, and as a music fan, that matters a little more to me. If that makes me a terrible person, all I gotta say is sorry for liking music. To this day, over a decade after first getting into the band as a naive 11-year-old kid, the Red Hot Chili Peppers are still a band I hold in high regard as being a true favorite in my music collection. I enjoy the music very much and enjoy analyzing the different instrumental parts and even lyrical themes in their songs. No matter how much I might venture off into the world of progressive metal or alternative metal or pop punk, they'll always be a band I enjoy coming back to. So now here's the part at the end of the video where I ask you, the viewer, what's wrong with the Red Hot Chili Peppers? Please be rational when leaving your responses in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this video, take care, and have a nice day. I'm Shades, and I'll see you next time.